let's see, being recorded. Okay, now I'm more nervous. It would be nice to know what people are curious about, but I don't know a good way to do that unless people want to, and I would love it if they did, typed in their primary interest or question or curiosity or why they're here. Just really briefly, if people are willing to do that. It's an awkward platform, obviously, for engagement, but it would be much more fun for me and maybe you if there was that possibility. I see there are a couple chats. Sonia said, yes, I'm interested in learning any ways to decrease bias. Okay, thank you, Marissa. Interested in the tenets of Buddhism. Great. I don't know much about Buddhism. I'm a counselor educator and interested in how to integrate this information in teaching. Interest in Buddhism, good. I'm glad to hear so much about Buddhism because that's what I feel most confident about. Really interested on the topic and looking forward to the presentation. Thank you, Stella. Okay. Anyone else, maybe? Connecting Buddhism and client wellness. Okay, great. Unconscious biases in myself, interested in the integration of Buddhism and counseling. Thank you. I really appreciate those comments. It makes me feel a little bit same. I'd love to learn ways to battle our internal bias and how Buddhism can assist with that. Okay, thank you so much for all those. And I hate to close this dialogue box, Caitlin. There's not a way to keep it open. I always have to go down and look for more questions.
I'll be as the host.
Oh, who is?
Oh. Tanisha, so I'll do your questions as they come up.
Oh, oh, thank you, Tanisha. Okay, great. Okay, all right. Continue. Okay, my name's John Gordon. I've done 2 years of graduate school in clinical mental health counseling at Northern Arizona University. I still have my internship to do. In the meantime, I've just taken a job with a community, integrated community health agency in Canyon City, Colorado. So that's where I'm coming from you today. And thank you again for joining. It's nice to have this nice 33 participants. Wow. Okay, I wish I would have had water. My mouth is dry already. So there was a lot of interest in Buddhism and bias, of course, which is what I'm here to talk about. Let's see, now how do I move this forward? So these are the objectives as I've kind of reworded them from the program. So I was going to talk about a few instances of what would appear to be implicit or hidden prejudice, racist prejudice in particular. Introduce you to some Buddhist ideas that relate to implicit bias and prejudice. Give some examples in the mental health field. And then as a few people indicated, how can this be useful to you? And what might a meditative or mindfulness practice do by way of helping with prejudice and bias, and how that might affect our relationships. I'll say that for me personally, I've been practicing in some form or another, to some intensity or another, meditation for, let's see, 98, over 2 decades. And my personal experience and opinion is it can help with these things. And really, for the most entrenched and hidden of our prejudices, I frankly don't see any other hope. I guess I kind of think as long as we're human, well, short of enlightenment, we're always going to have biases. Um, and the goal of meditative practice ultimately is enlightenment, and that's a loaded word. But one way to understand enlightenment is, as we'll see in a slide later, is to be free of preferences. I think I'm going to skip these. Well, maybe I'll do them quickly. This study sent out thousands of resumes, and they were identical resumes, except what they did is they changed the names to ones that would suggest a person of a white person or a black applicant. And what did they see? The same resume was about 50% more likely to be responded to if the name was a putatively white name versus a putatively black name. These job applicants actually went out in the field. And what they did is, they matched pairs in age and height and sort of their social fluency. And they found they did a white candidate, a black candidate, and a Hispanic candidate. And as you might guess, in applications to 171 employers, the white tester received a callback or a job offer 31% of the time, compared to 25% of the time for a Latino and 15% of the time for a black. And what was particularly astounding about this study is that even when they put a criminal record, or even when they had the white person mention a criminal record, they still actually had callbacks more often than either the Hispanic or black. 17% for the white person, 15% for the Latino, 13% for the black. That's even with admitting to having a criminal history. Car sales, they sent about 300 people to car lots, and they found on average that the black females and males were offered prices on average $700 more. This is from the housing and urban development, a study they did in 2012, and it shows the frequency with which blacks, Hispanics, and Asians were told about or shown units compared to a white person. And this is available from the urban housing and urban development, if anybody wanted to look that up. So, study in 2011, they sent emails to, they said representatives. I think they must have done all the representatives in the House. And again, they changed only the name. Whether it would appear to be a person who was white or a person who was black. And they found that the white names received more response than the blacks. I don't have percentages for that. But they found that was true no matter the party. It was true for both Republicans and Democrats. And it was it only achieved some parity when it was a minority representative who was responding. The Academy, this refers to prospective students expressing interest via emails with university professors, suggest expressing interest in their doctoral programs, graduate level programs, and also doing research. And they found in an audit of over 6,000 professors in US universities drawn from 89 disciplines, so academic disciplines, and 259 institutions, professors contacted, they were much more likely to contact people who were, well, you can guess how the racial disparities lined up. And the point of this study was to show that the opportunities are closed even before people have a chance to enter. This looked at cases in jurors in Florida and found that when the jury was all white, they were 16% more likely to convict a black defendant, and that equaled out when there was even one black juror on the jury. And then this is a study that gets us more close to our field of interest, mental health. It had to do with physicians' tendency to recommend cardiac catheterization, so a procedure for people with heart issues. And when doctors were shown patient histories that were identical, except for the pictures of the patient, they were much less likely to recommend cardiac catheterization to black patients, even though the medical files were statistically identical to those of the white patients. So that research probably isn't going to surprise many of you or any of you. And what are the intersections with mental health? Well, the most obvious one in my mind is, well, there's all kinds of ways, of course, that mental health practitioners might bias clients, race being one of them, gender being another. But also, of course, we're in the field of actually giving people labels in the way of diagnoses. So that makes us particularly vulnerable. We're sort of primed, actually, to mental health stigma. This quote from an article in 2019 actually considers stigma to be part of a psychiatric disorder. And of course, it creates a barrier both to access and the quality of care. Depending on a person's diagnosis, particularly serious mental illness, they're more likely to have fewer life chances, have poorer health outcomes. And a good number of studies looking at mental health practitioners find that they are often no better than the general public in terms of the level of stigma that they have against mental health issues. So what might we do? Rather than point fingers outward looking for other examples of bias, I'm suggesting that we look inward at our own profession and our own practices. So these are three ideas from Buddhism that I think are central to the practice. And the first one, as I mentioned earlier, freeing oneself from preferences, softening a sense of separateness, so softening the boundaries and categories between us, And then this kind of mantra that I often hear in the practice, it it's most simply put, this is the goal: avoid doing harm, cultivate the good, and importantly, train the mind. So I guess that's a point to emphasize. These biases we have being often beneath our conscious and so entrenched with years of practice, um, take a lot of effort to root out. This is a quote from the Pali scriptures, which is the earliest recension of the Buddhist teaching. Um, and this gives an idea of what the goal is. Not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desire, is not born again to this world. So for those who don't know too much about Buddhism, you've probably heard the word nirvana or nibbana in the original Pali. Nirvana is the Sanskrit version of it. Nibbana is often translated as stilling, or and a metaphor that's often used, in fact, I think it originally meant this, was the blowing out of the candle. So the goal in Buddhism is not to be reborn. And without getting into ideas about reincarnation, we can think of being reborn as happening moment to moment, depending on what our consciousness is doing. Hopefully that will become more clear later. I'm going to pause to see if anyone's confused or has any questions. Or was Tanisha going to tell me that? But maybe I'll give people a chance.
Well, right now there aren't any questions. There are a couple comments.
Oh, should I look at the comments?
If you like, if you're taking a break, usually we save the questions for the end, but I mean it's however you want to do it.
Okay. So this again is the Buddhist text in the Pali language. And this is from a Zen patriarch, I think. I can go forward. Oh yes, here it is. So I mentioned stilling and nirvana and rebirth. Well, you could think of rebirth every time you have a preference. Every time your mind lands on a preference. You can think of that as a kind of identity formation that is rebirth in this very moment. And it's difficult for most of us to conceive that not being the case. How could we not do that? How could we not land on a fixed view? How could we not identify with things? Well, it is possible, I'm told. So here's some vocabulary. We're going to listen to some audio in a bit here, and it's by a monk by the name of Ajahn Sucitto. He's in the Theravada Buddhist tradition. He's a British fellow who's been practicing for over 4 decades. And he's going to use these words in the course of that audio. And so I wanted to introduce you to them. He uses the word chitta a lot. There are 2 words in Buddhism that can both be translated as mind, but they have different functions. The chitta is more, he describes them in various ways, but the chitta is more our subjective experience. It's our felt experience. It's what's happening with us before we name it, categorize it, judge it, try to push it away. It's just at the purest phenomenal level what we're experiencing in any given moment. Manas, another translation that gets the word that gets translated into mind, is something that forms objects. In Buddhism, consciousness has a little bit of a different definition. There are 6 kinds of consciousness, and they always refer to the mind taking an object. The 5 that we're all familiar with are the 5 sense bases: seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling. The 6th consciousness in Buddhism is actually thinking. Thoughts are considered objects. They have no less or more substantial reality than smelling, tasting, touching, and all the other 5 sense bases. They're all equivalent in terms of their substantiality. They're all relative and conditioned. So, why is that important? Because it's the thinking mind that creates objects out of other people, that creates categories, that puts people into categories. But the chitta doesn't do that. However, it's not as if it's this pure and innocent aspect of ourselves. It itself is the subject of training. Hopefully we'll hear a portion where Ajahn Suchito talks about training chitta. Chitta is what gets trained and released and free from rebirth, or in more practical terms, free from preferences, biases, ill will of any sort, actually. Sankhara, the word that is in the title, it's a difficult word to translate, but it's it's given various translations. Formations, activations, programs. It's all the pattern tendencies of the mind that are continually and happening. Some in our awareness, many beneath our awareness. Tanha is craving, upadana clinging, bhava, the V is pronounced as a W, becoming, jati, birth. These are all, Sankhara, Tanha, Upadana, Bhava, and Jati are all aspects of dependent origination. There are 12 features of dependent origination. Can you see my pointer? Oh shit, sorry, didn't want to do that. There it is. Can you see my pointer? Yes, thank you, Sonia. So you see Sankhara, number 2, and then down here you see Tanha, Upadana, Bhava, Jati. So Sankhara, thoughts, speech, or bodily deeds. There's generally three kinds of Sankhara, having to do with our actions, our thoughts, and our speech. And then craving, Tanha, Upadana, Bhava, Jati. So notice, and actually I'll talk about this. Here is how someone very beautifully and simply described that complicated dependent origination. These crazy 12 steps that begin with ignorance up here and end in aging and death. It's the cycle of samsara, of continual birth and rebirth. And the idea, again, for the Buddhist, is to still this process. I think that's one way to think of nibbana or release or enlightenment, is stilling. So you in simple terms, it's being quiet and contented without need to, form judgments, make categories, characterize myself or anyone else. So that's what it comes to. It's basically the law of cause and effect, which is one way to understand karma or kama in the Pali. For every cause, there is an effect. All of our experience in the consciousness realm is conditioned, and the training that happens in Buddhist meditative practice, the cultivating of the chitta, is to pay attention with mindfulness to the causes that create effects. And with more and more practice and more stilling of the conscious mind, the manos mind, the more we are able to discern cause and effect at the gross level, right? When I don't get enough sleep, I'm tired. When I drink too much coffee, I'm agitated, the gross level. But actually, at subtler and subtler levels of our experience, we see cause and effect as it's arising. I'm going to, if I can, I hope, move to some of the audio. Why? Because he's a monk of 40 years. He's much smarter than I am. And the point isn't really smarter. The point is that he's practiced meditation for 40 years. And he's seen things that frankly I haven't seen. Right now that I operate basically out of faith. I've had glimpses of what he talks about. I can understand what he's saying, but the experience is something totally different. And I can tell by listening to him that he's had the experience. So when he says that it's possible to root out these biases, I believe him because I can tell, well, my sense is that he's had the experience. So let's see if I have any comments or questions, and then I'm going to play some audio. There's someone we might be able. Oh, yeah. Anyone's welcome to my PowerPoint, and I'm sure my email can be made available, and you can have the chart. Does that answer that question, Leah? Oh, I hear a horn. Okay, let's see if I can do this. Oops. Is that working? Can you see the... Okay. I'm going to go to a portion of the talk where he talks a little bit about chitta, I hope. Oh,
in contact with discernible objects. And as you recognize the stories, therefore one, manasikara, it means, so it's this primary function of mano is to formalize an object. And so its primary organ is called manasikara. Actually the word is manas, but it's generally seen as mano form. Manasikara, it means it's a particular, that's called attention, manasikara, attention, that which crystallizes an object that we can then think about, conceive about, or in fact be tormented by, obsessed with. And it's not always under our control. This is manas, formulating objects that then, as the experience of one is beset by these objects, mental objects, tantalized by them, interested in them, disappointed by them. There's definitely objects there that one feels in contact with, discernible objects. And as you recognize the stories, the ideas, the plans, the memories, these are all crystallizing, brought into being through this function of manasikara, giving attention to, and then what arises is a mind object, a Dhamma. Now the other word that the English word mind covers is chitta, which so chitta is more to do with, well, on one level it's to do with inclinations, so certain urges, desires, wishes, good, skillful, unskillful, confused. It's a sort of urging, it's a volitional centre stuff. So it seeks an object to get something going on. Chitta is this surging in fear, joy, love, hate, confusion. This is all chitta material. So these things are not really so much objects as subjective rushes that happen to us. Chitta can be trained to filter out that and keep inclining towards qualities such as gladness, generosity, compassion, patience, relinquishment. So it's a doer, it's an activator. And chitta can be trained to calmed, soothed, steadied, brightened. Chitta can enter samadhi, and it can enter the place where actually the manovijnana stops, or it's very, there's no objects coming into mind. And in fact it says that place where mano stops should be understood. So there can be a quality of deep understanding that occurs at a place when this manas quality has stopped.
okay. You can hear me? Sanya, thank you for nodding. So important to know, hopefully that you had some introduction so you could catch some of that. But he said, chitta can enter the place that manos can't. Samadhi. Samadhi is a quality of deep meditative concentration that approximates stillness. And it's a place where attention is able to see at a subtler level cause and effect. And 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 Buddhism, I've said it's about release and stilling. I haven't said what it's usually described as being about, which is the end of suffering. Well, those things are all synonymous. The stilling is the end of suffering. The stilling of the consciousness mind, the manos faculty that creates objects, which is essentially to create separation, right, between me and you. which is what consciousness does. Whenever I see, smell, hear, taste, touch, or think, even when I think, I'm creating an object. Thought becomes an object. I become an object. I don't know about you, any of you, but I am often, too often, an object of my thought processes. And I hope most of you fare better with that than I do, which is constantly judging, often criticizing myself. And so it's important to understand whenever the manos faculty is engaged in that kind of discursive thought, judgmental thought, judgmental even in the non-judgmental sense of the word judgmental, which is, again, just to form categories, make distinctions, label things, right? That's what the manos faculty does. Whenever that's happening, there's separation. And Ajahn Suchita would say, there's also agitation, suffering. So this relates Sankharas to that last paragraph there, accumulated habits, preferences, and opinions, right? The basis of stigma, the basis of bias, the basis of prejudice, and the basis of discrimination, and the base of all manner of suffering. So these are some suggestions about, I'm going to go through these and then get back to the audio because there's so much more there that's valuable. These are some suggestions for anti-stigma campaigns, studies that were done particularly on mental health providers. Contact is often comes up. More contact with people that we might have stigmatizing attitudes toward often comes up as a possible corrective to prejudice and discrimination. And the more research I looked at, the more qualified that became. It has effects, but they don't tend to be long-lasting. And they have different effects for different age groups and different effects for different kinds of clinicians. So it's one of those things that needs to be very much qualified before it can be suggested as an unqualified approach to stigma and bias. That's what that one talks about. Much of the research talks about emphasizing people's ability to recover with the diagnoses that we tend to think of as not having high potentials of recovery. Okay, I'm going to stop there and see if there's anything before I return to the audio. Anything to clarify? Any questions? Okay. Can I get some feedback on the audio so far? Because I think there's a lot of good information still to come in that audio that I'd like to return to. I think it's got, as I said, for me, it offers the most promise of getting at these deepest levels of the unconscious and the preferences that we don't have a lot of awareness, or maybe we are aware of it. I tend to think we are aware of most of our prejudices, but modifying them, changing, releasing from them is a whole nother requires a whole nother level of commitment. Okay, I'm going to move ahead in the audio. He goes on to talk about the sense bases, again, as not being something that we can rely on. And I need to emphasize, again, that the conscious, the thought, manos faculty, what our minds do in terms of thought, that's one of those categories that isn't very dependable. For instance, um, your attitudes change not only about other people from day to day, but yourself, right? So even what we're thinking, what's substantial, what, well, it's unreliable is the point. And because it's unreliable, it causes agitation. It's not the stilling that we're after. Okay, new share, audio. I'm going to go to this point where he talks about
It was people,
it's not what you
because it's
and I have the transcript. Are you able? What are you able to see? Just the audio, correct? Okay, I can still see the transcript. So he's just about to say um, he's going to talk about the importance of attention, right? So it's not what we. Well, I'll let him say it. He's better than I am.
it's not what you see, it's what you give attention to in what you see, isn't it? That becomes your reality.
You can hear it. Okay.
Attention to much, but also what you give attention to. Because it's not what you see, it's what you give attention to in what you see, isn't it? That becomes your reality. And this is, if you pretty sometimes extremely revealing to recognize what two people who apparently were in the same place remember of an incident that happened 5 years ago. And there's definitely some overlap, but the details. He was wearing a yellow shirt. No, it's a sweater. Margaret was there. No, she wasn't. She was out at the. We had turkey dinner. No, we didn't. We went out to a restaurant. What? And what do you give attention to?
So the point is that, again, people have different experiences of sense consciousness, and so how reliable is that? I'm going to skip ahead to where he comments on that.
Even as being foundation for your reality. Sense consciousness is not very accurate at all. In terms of what's meaningful for liberation, what is most accurate for liberation, what you really know about liberation is what's happening in your citta. And sense consciousness will tell you that if you know how to interpret the signs. And the signs are, of course, degrees of hostility, fear, inferred, suggested, coming from others, coming from myself, ill will, guilt, intimidation, threat, and so forth. That's a sign of ill will. This I need to review.
So you hear that? Paying attention to subjective experience, those little flashes in the heart of, he said, greed, fear, hostility, inferred ill will, threat, guilt, feeling intimidated. This I need to review. So that's where the manas faculty comes that's when it's useful, is when it's applying wise attention in the form of mindfulness to what's going on in sense consciousness, what's going on in the chitta, and how those two relate. Again, cause effect. What is it about my sense experience that's causing rushes, quivers, retractions in the heart? Okay, he's going to say this next part is critical, I think.
For this, I better unhook from my idea that he, she, they don't like me, or I'm not as good as he, she, they are. Can I not be dependent upon that? Can my consciousness not be dependent upon that, but in fact dependent upon the qualities of wisdom, activated wisdom, dependent upon the qualities of faith in the triple gem? There is a way through this, dependent upon the qualities of energy. Dependent upon Dhamma, we seek our support. We take our nitsaya, our dependence, on Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and we challenge our assumptions. We investigate our assumptions. Does this quality of ill will, craving, greed, proliferation, delusion, is that present?
Okay, so again, he said we challenge our assumptions, we investigate our assumptions. So much about meditative practice is about investigation. It's looking for the links between cause and effect. And where is it putting the attention? He said, I need to unhook from my idea that he, she, they don't like me, or I'm not as good as he, she, they are, or I'm better than he, she, they are, right? Because that happens too. We need to challenge our assumptions. We need to investigate our assumptions. And then what if they're present? What if ill will? What if greed? What if delusion is present? Now here's what he says in response to that.
If it's present, there's no point rebuking and blaming and castigating and feeling hopeless. The point is, now you're seeing some of these signals. Now is the time to not build something upon them, in fact, deconstruct.
So I think that is such a beautiful response. So I notice in me, I notice ill will, I notice craving and greed, I notice prejudice, I notice bias, I notice fear. If it's present, there's no point in rebuking, blaming, castigating, and feeling hopeless, right? The point is, now I'm seeing the signals in the chitta. Now is the time to build not something upon those the experiences, but deconstruct them. Unhook is what the word he used earlier. Okay, I'm gonna, let's see, 10:50. Give me a moment and I'm gonna see where I wanna skip ahead to. If you have any questions, shout out.
Up on TV.
There is one question in the chat box. It says, can you give an example of deconstructing a site prejudice? I mean, a cheetah prejudice.
Okay, thank you. Okay, give an example of deconstructing. Well,
We can art, this we're looking.
I'm gonna
power are whenever, as because this is and for the non-perception, the sphere of infinite.
So the deconstructing is the investigation with wisdom. That's what he said. He said he said instead of relying on those reactions or dependent on sense consciousness, can I put my faith in wisdom? Let's see what
space and so on. Says don't even cling to that. Which, right.
How is it possible not to cling to sense consciousness?
It's not going to be a problem, probably. So how is that possible? And for the world of the mano-mind, this is not possible. The world of citta, it is possible. Karma is the field, craving the juice. Consciousness is this thing we've been born into, this experience we've born in, assembling worlds. But that seed doesn't sprout if there's no juice. There is an inheritance. There is karma, there is that which has been felt, moved, touched, delighted, shocked. There is that. Does consciousness have to be placed there? And does it still get the juice of I am, I was, I will be, I never will be, they were, I am, I'm not?
So he's asking, I have these experiences at the citta level, these rushes of fear, intimidation, ill will. Do I have to elaborate on that with consciousness? Or can I simply experience it as what it is? I'm gonna skip to the end, near the end, where he talks about mindfulness, which is a term that most people are familiar with. And what does that mean? Oh, I'm supposed to end now.
We might start with something more modest. I will not cling to eye consciousness, ear consciousness, body consciousness, contact, feeling, perceptions, activations, formations, sankhara. Instead of clinging to them, I will instead cultivate a more skillful mode of holding them, which resembles clinging in some respects. It's mindfulness. Mindfulness holds an object. Mindfulness is able to, just the clinging does, but mindfulness, void of craving. Just steadying, holding. This is the field of experience, it's like this. And inquiring within that field with pertinent attention, wise attention, skillful attention, and with full comprehension one sees, this is the bit, not the colour or the shape or the taste or the sound, but the quality of passion, ill will, distress, projection, confusion. That's the piece. And that's not in her or him or that. That's in this citta. Therefore this must be my topic, and the quelling and the cooling of this through detachment.
So there you have it. So beautiful, I think. It's not in the color. It's not in her or him. It's in this chitta. And mindfulness sees and holds without craving, he said, without clinging. Um, in the full experience of what transpires in the chitta is its release. But as soon as the manos mind comes in to judge, then we have an object and we have separateness and we have a fixed view that is not release, but is clinging. So mindfulness is holding without preference, holding without view, um, uh, holding in our subjective experience instead of looking outward at him, her, it, or even the thoughts about myself. I'm out of time. I hope it's been useful, and I'm sorry it went so fast. And however, if anyone has any questions and they want to contact me, I'm not sure how that happens, but I'm happy to have that happen. And again, offer any resources I can. Thank you. Oh, there's comments here I'm going to look at. But you're thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. There's a question I'm going to look for. Oh, I think I saw it already. Dr. Gordon. Okay. Bye-bye.
Tanisha, I see that you're the host. Would you be able to
ongoing thing.
make me
I'm
the
sorry?
host for presented next?
Let me see.